It's okay. Let's look at this part together.
I don't get it.
I know it's tough. We'll go
It's too
slow.
hard.
Billionaire Marcus Chun sat in the back row of the cramped elementary school auditorium, his $4,000 suit hidden beneath a worn leather jacket, his face tight with shame as he watched his 8-year-old son, Lucas, stumble through a simple reading passage on stage. For 3 agonizing minutes, every parent in the room listened as Lucas struggled to sound out words that his classmates had mastered years ago. Some parents whispered to each other. A few checked their phones. One mother actually laughed before catching herself. Marcus had conquered Wall Street. He had built a $12 billion tech empire from nothing. He had negotiated deals with world leaders and commanded rooms full of the most powerful executives on the planet. But sitting in that plastic chair, watching his son's face turn red with humiliation, Marcus Chun felt more powerless than he had ever felt in his entire life. He had tried everything. Private tutors charging $500 an hour. Specialized reading programs that cost $30,000 per semester. Educational psychologists. Neurological assessments. Every expensive solution that money could buy. Nothing worked. Lucas still couldn't read at grade level. Still came home crying. Still begged his father every morning not to make him go to school. The other parents were shooting Marcus looks that he couldn't quite read. They didn't know he was wealthy. He had deliberately enrolled Lucas in this modest public school in Queens under his wife's maiden name, hoping to give his son a normal childhood away from the pressure of being a billionaire's heir. But their judgment was clear. Why can't this father help his own child? Marcus had hired the best educational consultants in the country. He had flown in specialists from London and Singapore. He had converted an entire floor of his Manhattan penthouse into a learning center with every technological advantage available. Yet here was his son, unable to read a simple paragraph about a dog and a ball. The principal had called Marcus in for a meeting last week, her voice carefully neutral as she explained that Lucas was falling further behind and might need to repeat 3rd grade. The words had hit Marcus like a physical blow. His son was brilliant. Marcus could see it in the way Lucas solved complex puzzles, the way he understood patterns that adults missed, the way he could take apart and rebuild any mechanical device. Lucas had inherited his father's genius, but something was blocking him from accessing the written word, and no amount of money seemed able to remove that block. That's when something unexpected happened. As the reading assembly ended and parents began filtering out, a young black woman in a simple cardigan and modest flats approached Marcus with a warmth in her eyes that stopped him mid-step. "Mr. Williams?" she asked, using the fake name on Lucas's enrollment forms. "I'm Miss Johnson, Amara Johnson. I'm Lucas's reading intervention specialist." Marcus braced himself for another professional assessment of his son's failures. Another carefully worded explanation of deficits and challenges and areas of concern. Instead, Miss Johnson smiled and said something that Marcus had never heard from any of the expensive experts he'd hired. "Your son is extraordinary, and I'd like to stay after school with him every day until he believes that himself." Marcus stared at this woman who couldn't have been more than 28 years old, wearing clothes that probably cost less than his watch strap, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. What Marcus Chun didn't know was that Amara Johnson had been watching Lucas struggle for 3 months before she finally approached his father. She had seen something in that little boy that none of the assessment reports captured. A fierce intelligence trapped behind a wall of frustration and shame. She recognized it because she had once been exactly where Lucas was. Amara had grown up in the Brownsville housing projects, raised by her grandmother after her mother's death and her father's imprisonment. She had struggled with reading until age 10, convinced she was stupid, written off by teachers who had too many students and too few resources to give her individual attention. Then one teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had stayed after school with her every single day for an entire year. Not for extra pay, not for recognition, simply because she believed that Amara was worth the investment. "You're not broken," Mrs. Patterson had told her. "Your brain just works differently. And different isn't less, it's just different." That single year of patient, dedicated attention had transformed Amara's entire life. She had gone from failing 3rd grade to graduating as valedictorian of her high school. She had earned a full scholarship to Columbia University, then a master's in special education from NYU. And she had returned to teach in underfunded public schools because she knew there were thousands of children just like her who needed someone to believe in them. Lucas Chun, enrolled as Lucas Williams, had caught her attention from his first day at PS 117 in Queens. She watched him solve a 100-piece puzzle in under 4 minutes while unable to read the instructions on the box. She saw him explain mechanical concepts to classmates using hand gestures and drawings when words failed him. She noticed how he would trace letters in the air as if trying to catch them before they rearranged themselves. The signs were unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. Lucas had dyslexia, but not just any dyslexia. He had the same visual spatial processing differences that often accompanied exceptional mechanical and mathematical intelligence. His brain wasn't broken. It was wired for brilliance in ways that traditional reading instruction couldn't reach. But Amara also saw something that broke her heart every day. She saw a little boy who had stopped trying because he believed he would never succeed. She saw a child who hid during reading time and pretended to be sick on days when oral presentations were scheduled. She saw the light dimming in eyes that should have been full of curiosity and joy. And she saw a father who came to every school event, sat in the back row, and watched his son with a desperate love that no amount of expensive clothing could hide. Amara didn't know who Marcus Chun really was. She didn't know about the billions or the empire or the penthouse. She only knew what she saw. A father who clearly loved his son and a son who was drowning in a system that didn't know how to reach him. "Miss Johnson," Marcus said carefully, "I appreciate your interest, but we've already tried intensive intervention programs. We've consulted with specialists. I'm not sure what more can be done." Amara nodded, unsurprised by his skepticism. She had heard versions of this response before from parents who had been disappointed too many times. "Mr. Williams, can I share something with you?" Marcus nodded, curious despite himself. "I was Lucas. 20 years ago, I was sitting in a classroom just like his, convinced I was stupid because the letters wouldn't stay still on the page. I couldn't read a picture book while my classmates were reading chapter books. I wanted to disappear." Marcus felt his chest tighten as he recognized his son's pain in this woman's words. "What changed?" he asked quietly. "One teacher. One person who refused to give up on me. Who saw what I could become instead of focusing on what I couldn't do yet. She stayed after school with me every day for a year. Not because she was paid to, but because she believed I was worth the investment." Amara paused, holding Marcus's gaze with an intensity that surprised him. "I'd like to be that person for Lucas. Not because it's my job. I don't get paid for after-school hours. But because I see in your son the same potential that Mrs. Patterson saw in me. And I refuse to watch another brilliant child give up on himself." Marcus looked at this young teacher. Her earnest expression, her worn cardigan, her complete lack of awareness that she was speaking to one of the wealthiest men in America. And he saw something he hadn't encountered in all his dealings with expensive consultants and elite specialists. He saw someone who genuinely cared about his son as a person, not as a client or a case study or a paycheck. "What would this look like?" Marcus asked. 45 minutes after school, every day. I'll work with Lucas using methods specifically designed for visual spatial learners. Techniques that most standard programs don't include because they require more time and individual attention than schools can typically provide. "What do you need from me?" Amara smiled. "Just your permission and your trust." Marcus felt his carefully constructed defenses beginning to crack. He had built a $12 billion company by trusting his instincts about people. And every instinct he had was telling him that Amara Johnson was exactly what his son needed. "You have both," Marcus said. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow, 3:15 p.m., room 204. The first week was brutal. Lucas arrived at room 204 with his arms crossed and his jaw set, a miniature version of his father's boardroom face. He had been through too many interventions, too many specialists, too many programs that promised results and delivered only more proof of his failures. "I'm not stupid," Lucas announced before Amara could even say hello. "My brain just doesn't work right." Amara knelt down, so she was at eye level with the little boy. "Lucas, can I tell you a secret?" Lucas looked skeptical but curious. When I was your age, I thought the exact same thing. I thought my brain was broken because I couldn't read like the other kids. I cried every night and begged my grandmother to let me stay home from school. Lucas's defensive posture softened slightly. You couldn't read either? Not until I was 10 years old. 2 years older than you are now. And you know what? Now I have 2 college degrees, and I've read over 1,000 books. Lucas's eyes widened. 1,000, maybe more. I lost count. Amara smiled. Your brain isn't broken, Lucas. It's actually pretty amazing. It just learns differently than most people's brains. And once we figure out how your brain likes to learn, reading is going to make sense in a way it never has before. For the first time in months, Lucas's face showed something other than defeat. It showed curiosity. Amara started by throwing out everything that had failed. No more phonics flashcards. No more repetitive drills. No more techniques designed for neurotypical learners and forced onto a brain that processed information in 3 dimensions rather than 2. Instead, Amara brought out colored overlays that transformed the black and white page into something Lucas's visual system could process. She used textured letters that Lucas could trace with his fingers, building muscle memory to anchor the abstract symbols. She incorporated movement, having Lucas walk the shape of letters across the room, turning his whole body into a learning tool. Your brain thinks in pictures and movements, Amara explained. So we're going to teach you to read with pictures and movements. By the end of the first week, Lucas could identify letters he had previously confused. By the end of the second week, he was sounding out simple words. By the end of the first month, he was reading 3-word sentences. But more importantly, Lucas was smiling again. Marcus watched this transformation with growing amazement and a deepening sense of something he couldn't quite name. Every day at 4 p.m., he would park his Tesla, the only luxury he allowed himself during school pickups, around the corner and walk to the school to collect Lucas. And every day, he would pause outside room 204 and watch through the window as Amara worked with his son. He saw the patience, the creativity, the genuine delight on Amara's face when Lucas succeeded, and the gentle encouragement when he struggled. He saw his son laughing during a reading lesson, something Marcus had never witnessed before. And he saw Amara stay late, sometimes until 5:30 or 6 p.m., working with Lucas long past the 45 minutes she had promised, because Lucas was engaged and learning, and she refused to interrupt that momentum. One evening, Marcus arrived to find Amara slumped at her desk, head in her hands, clearly exhausted. Miss Johnson, Marcus knocked gently on the doorframe. Are you all right? Amara looked up quickly, embarrassed to be caught in a moment of weakness. Oh, Mr. Williams. I'm Euphine. Just a long day. Marcus had built his fortune by reading people. He could see that Amara was far from fine. When was the last time you ate something? He asked. Amara hesitated. I had a granola bar this morning. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. There's a diner down the street. Let me buy you dinner. Consider it a thank you for what you're doing for Lucas. Amara started to refuse. She was careful about maintaining professional boundaries, but her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, and Lucas giggled. Please, Miss Johnson. Lucas chimed in. My dad makes really good choices at restaurants. Marcus tried not to wince at the irony. His son thought he was a middle-class father who was good at ordering diner food, not a billionaire who regularly dined at 3 Michelin-star establishments. Okay, Amara relented, but just something quick. I have lesson plans to work on tonight. At the diner, Marcus learned more about Amara Johnson in 1 hour than he had discovered about most people in years of business dealings. He learned that she lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn, sharing rent with 2 other teachers because New York salaries didn't stretch far. He learned that she sent money every month to her grandmother in Brownsville, the woman who had raised her. He learned that she worked a second job on weekends tutoring wealthy families in Manhattan. Families, Marcus realized with a jolt, who probably knew him by name and reputation. Why do you do it? Marcus asked, watching Amara devour a turkey sandwich with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. The after-school work with Lucas, you said yourself you don't get paid for those hours. Amara set down her sandwich and considered the question seriously. Because I know what it feels like to be written off. To have everyone assume you can't learn because you don't learn the way they expect. And I know what it feels like to have one person believe in you when no one else does. She met Marcus's eyes with an intensity that made his breath catch. That one person changed my entire life trajectory. I went from hopeless case to Columbia graduate because Mrs. Patterson refused to give up on me. I can't give that gift to every struggling child in New York, but I can give it to the ones who cross my path. Marcus felt something crumbling inside him. Walls he had built over decades of business dealings, protections against caring too much about anyone outside his family. Lucas is lucky to have you, Marcus said quietly. Amara smiled. Lucas is lucky to have a father who shows up to every school event and waits patiently every afternoon. You'd be surprised how many of my students don't have that. Marcus felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He showed up, yes, but he had also spent years trying to fix Lucas with money rather than presence. He had hired specialists instead of sitting on the floor and learning alongside his son. He had thrown resources at the problem while missing what Lucas really needed. Someone who saw him. Someone who believed in him. Someone who refused to give up. Everything that Amara had provided for free. 3 months into their daily sessions, Lucas read his first complete book aloud. It was a simple picture book, asterisk green eggs and ham asterisk by Dr. Seuss. But to Marcus, watching from his usual spot outside room 204, it might as well have been Shakespeare. Lucas read every word. He sounded out the tricky parts. He laughed at the silly rhymes. And when he finished, he looked up at Amara with tears streaming down his face. I did it, Lucas whispered. I really did it. Amara pulled him into a hug, her own eyes glistening. You did it. I always knew you could. Marcus had negotiated billion-dollar deals without his voice wavering. He had fired executives and faced down hostile board members and testified before Congress without showing emotion. But watching his son read, his son who had believed he was broken, who had begged not to go to school, who had lost all hope, Marcus Chun felt tears running down his face. He stepped into the classroom, and Lucas looked up with the biggest smile Marcus had ever seen. Dad, did you hear? I read the whole book. Miss Johnson said I could take it home and read it to you tonight. Marcus knelt down and pulled his son into his arms. I heard everything, buddy. I'm so proud of you. Over Lucas's shoulder, Marcus caught Amara's eye and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Amara nodded, wiping her own tears, and Marcus knew that no words could ever be enough. But Marcus Chun was about to face a different kind of challenge. One that would test everything he thought he knew about gratitude, generosity, and what it truly means to help someone. That evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep clutching his Dr. Seuss book, Marcus sat in his penthouse study and pulled up everything he could find about Amara Johnson. Her social media was sparse, but revealing. Fundraisers for classroom supplies she purchased with her own money. Posts celebrating student achievements in the humblest terms. Photos of her visiting her grandmother at a nursing home in Brooklyn, a facility Marcus recognized as one of the lower-tier options in the city. He found her teacher profile on the school district website and winced at the salary listed. Less than $65,000 per year in one of the most expensive cities in the world. For a woman with a master's degree from NYU. For someone who stayed hours after school every day, unpaid, to change children's lives. Marcus pulled up his contacts and began making calls. Within an hour, he had arranged a $500,000 anonymous donation to PS 117, earmarked for reading intervention programs and teacher supplemental pay. He had located the nursing home where Amara's grandmother lived and arranged for her transfer to one of the finest care facilities in the city, with all expenses covered by an anonymous benefactor. He had contacted the NYU alumni office to establish a fellowship in Amara's name for future special education teachers. He was reaching for his phone to call a real estate agent about purchasing a Brooklyn brownstone for Amara when something stopped him. A memory of his own father, a Chinese immigrant who had worked as a dishwasher until his hands bled, who had refused charity even when they couldn't afford heat in their Queens apartment. Respect means letting people earn their own way, his father had said. Asterisk, help that takes away dignity isn't help at all. Asterisk, Marcus set down his phone and stared at the ceiling of his $40 million penthouse. He wanted to give Amara everything. He wanted to solve every problem in her life with a single wire transfer. He wanted to repay the gift she had given his son with a generosity so overwhelming that she would never have to worry about anything again. But was that what Amara would want? She had chosen to work in an underfunded public school when she could have earned far more in private practice. She had stayed in Brooklyn near her grandmother instead of chasing higher-paying opportunities. She had declined payment for her after-school work with Lucas because she believed some gifts shouldn't be transactional. Would drowning her in money honor who she was? Or would it fundamentally change the thing that made her special? Marcus spent the entire night wrestling with this question, one of the hardest problems he had ever faced, and one that no amount of money could solve. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He walked into PS 117 at 7:30 a.m. and asked to speak with Principal Rodriguez. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, closing the door to her modest office. "And I need your help figuring out how to do this right." Principal Rodriguez looked curious but cautious. Parent meetings at this hour rarely brought good news. "My name isn't Marcus Williams. It's Marcus Chun. I'm the founder and CEO of Chun Technologies." Principal Rodriguez's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, then recognition as she connected the face before her to the one she had seen on countless magazine covers and news broadcasts. "Mr. Chun, why is your son enrolled here under a false name?" "Because I wanted Lucas to have a normal childhood, to be judged for who he is, not whose son he is. And because..." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I was ashamed that I couldn't help him. I thought if we went somewhere no one knew us, maybe he could start fresh." Principal Rodriguez softened. She had seen many parents struggling with their children's challenges, but few had the humility to admit it so openly. "And now I've watched one of your teachers do what millions of my dollars couldn't accomplish. Miss Johnson has given my son something that I couldn't buy: belief in himself. And I want to help this school in a way that actually makes a difference." Marcus leaned forward. "But I don't want to just write a check and walk away. I've done that my whole career, and I'm starting to realize that money without relationship is just transactions. I want to do something real, something that honors what Miss Johnson actually values." Principal Rodriguez studied this billionaire who was asking for guidance instead of dictating terms. In 30 years of education, she had never encountered anything quite like this. "What do you have in mind?" she asked. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood before the PS 117 community in the gymnasium, his identity finally revealed, his son by his side. The reaction was everything he had feared: gasps of recognition, whispered speculation about motives. Parents who had chatted with him casually now looking at him with new, calculating eyes. But Marcus wasn't there for them. He was there for Amara, who was seated in the front row looking confused about why she had been asked to attend an assembly. "Most of you don't know me," Marcus began. "You knew Marcus Williams, a father who drove an old Tesla and wore worn leather jackets to school events. But my real name is Marcus Chun, and I have a confession to make." The gymnasium was completely silent. 3 months ago, my son Lucas couldn't read. He had been assessed by dozens of specialists. We had spent more money than most people earn in a lifetime on interventions that didn't work. And I enrolled him here under a false name because I was ashamed that all my success couldn't help my own child. Marcus looked at Lucas, who nodded encouragingly. Then Miss Johnson volunteered to stay after school with Lucas every single day. Not for pay, not for recognition, simply because she believed my son was worth the investment. Amara's hand flew to her mouth as she realized what was happening. In 3 months, Miss Johnson accomplished what years of expensive programs couldn't achieve. My son can read. But more importantly, my son believes in himself again. He wakes up excited for school. He carries books everywhere he goes. He told me last week that he wants to be a teacher when he grows up, like Miss Johnson. Lucas beamed with pride. I could stand here and announce that I'm donating millions of dollars to this school. And I will, but not in the way you might expect. Marcus turned to face Amara directly. Miss Johnson, I've spent weeks trying to figure out how to thank you. My first instinct was to solve every problem in your life with money. New apartment, new car, paid off student loans. But then I realized something. He stepped closer to her. You chose this work not because you couldn't do something more lucrative, but because this is what you value. You stayed after school with my son not because you wanted payment, but because you wanted to give him what someone once gave you. A gift freely given is worth more than one that's purchased. Amara's tears were falling freely now. So instead of just writing a check, I want to offer you a partnership. Chin Technologies is launching a new education division, and I want you to lead it. Not as an employee who takes orders, as a true partner who shapes our mission. The gymnasium erupted in murmurs and gasps. Your salary will be whatever you consider appropriate for your expertise and experience. Your first task will be training our team to implement the methods you used with Lucas in schools across the country. Your office can be wherever you want it, including right here at PS 117, if that's what you prefer. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. But I also want to do something for your grandmother, Mrs. Rosa Johnson, the woman who raised you and sacrificed everything for your education. I've arranged for her transfer to the finest care facility in the city, not as charity, but as a thank you from Lucas, who wants his reading grandma to have the same quality of care that helped him learn to read. The envelope contained a letter from Lucas, painstakingly written in his new reading skills. Dear Miss Johnson's grandma, asterisk thank you for raising the best teacher in the world. Because of you, Miss Johnson helped me. Now I can read this letter to you myself. Asterisk. Love, Lucas Chun. Amara took the letter with shaking hands and read it as the gymnasium watched in emotional silence. Miss Johnson, Marcus concluded, you taught my son that he wasn't broken, just different. You taught me that some problems can't be solved with money, only with patient, persistent love. And you reminded me that the most valuable things in life are the ones freely given. Marcus extended his hand. Will you partner with me to bring what you gave Lucas to children across the country? Amara stood slowly, tears streaming down her face, and took Marcus's hand. On one condition, she said, her voice steady despite her emotions. Name it. I stay at PS 117 3 afternoons a week. These children need me too. Marcus smiled. A real smile, not the practiced expression he used in boardrooms. I wouldn't have it any other way. 6 months later, the Chin Johnson Education Initiative had trained over 200 teachers in specialized reading intervention techniques. Schools in 12 states had implemented Amara's methods, reaching thousands of children who had previously been written off as unable to learn. Amara's grandmother watched the news coverage from her private room in the finest care facility in Brooklyn, surrounded by photos of her granddaughter accepting awards and meeting with education officials. Lucas Chun, now reading 2 grade levels above average, had become an advocate for children with dyslexia. He spoke at school assemblies about his journey, always crediting Miss Johnson, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. But the transformation that mattered most happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when Marcus Chun walked into room 204 at PS 117 and found Amara working with a new student, a shy girl named Maya, who reminded everyone of a young Amara. May I? Marcus asked, gesturing to the small chair beside them. Of course, Amara said, surprised. But shouldn't you be running your company? Marcus sat down and picked up a picture book. I spent my whole career believing that my value came from building things, making money, solving problems with resources. But watching you with Lucas taught me something different. He opened the book and looked at Maya with the same patient attention that Amara had shown his son. The most important thing I can build isn't a company. It's a relationship. So if you don't mind, I'd like to learn how to do what you do. Amara smiled, the same warm smile that had first given Marcus hope in that school auditorium months ago. The first lesson, she said, is that every child is worth the investment, not because of what they might become, but because of who they already are. Marcus nodded, thinking about his own father, who had washed dishes and dreamed of a better life for his son. About his son, who had gone from hopeless to hopeful because one teacher refused to give up. About Amara, who had chosen purpose over profit and changed everything. You know what's funny? Marcus said, watching Maya trace letters with her finger. This all started because I was ashamed of my son's struggles. I thought his reading problems reflected my failure as a father. And now, Amara asked. Marcus smiled at Maya, who was beaming at her first successfully sounded out word. Now, I understand that the struggle was never the problem. The problem was thinking I could fix everything alone. Lucas didn't need my money or my connections. He needed someone who saw him, truly saw him. That's what you gave him. That's what Mrs. Patterson gave you. And that's what we're giving Maya right now. Amara nodded, her eyes glistening. That's the thing about teaching, she said. The lessons go both ways. As Marcus drove home that evening, Lucas in the back seat reading aloud from a chapter book, he thought about the journey that had brought them here. A billionaire who couldn't help his own son. A teacher who gave freely what money couldn't buy. A little boy who learned that his brain wasn't broken, just different. And a lesson that Marcus would carry for the rest of his life. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't throw money at a problem, but sit beside someone, believe in them, and refuse to give up. The struggling student was reading now. The teacher had become a partner, and the billionaire had learned that the greatest investment he would ever make wasn't counted in dollars, but in presence, patience, and genuine human connection. It all began with a simple decision. A teacher who chose to stay after school, not because she was paid to, but because she believed that one child was worth the extra hour. And in the end, that simple decision had changed 2 families, transformed a school, and created a ripple of hope that would touch thousands of children for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more.